Hello. Let's see. Am I live? We had some technical difficulties, which are not surprising in the least. Let me see if I'm live. Am I live? Am I live? Am I live? Hello. Oh, good. Someone's saying, hey, Claire. Oh, hey, Mark. Hi. Yeah, we had some technical problems, but those have been resolved. And now I am here. So I'm just making sure that I'm not, talking into a glass house bubble. Catherine can see me. Catherine, can you hear me also? Here's hoping. I know the last time we did this, we had some bracelets that made people mad with crazed angst. So I have not worn any bracelets today. I wasn't wearing any bracelets last time either, just to be fair. It was something wrong with my headphones and such. So, okay, great. So folks can hear me, folks can see me. Wonderful. That is the first and best step for a live webinar, right? So now let me try to make Periscope work at the same time, because that's always a challenge. Am I the only one that feels like Periscope cannot find friggin' Wi-Fi a lot of the time? It's like it sits there with the bar saying, initializing video stream, and won't do anything. Okay, here we go. So we're gonna name this the Live Work by Design Summit Finale. Great. Cool. Hello, Periscope. Let's set you up so you can watch as well up there, guys. Cool. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Hi, Periscope folks. Welcome to the Live Work by Design Summit Finale. And hello to everyone there on Google Hangouts and on our live Summit Keynote page. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for hanging in there for those. I think it ended up being 7 or 8 minutes late though. Oh no, someone is hearing bracelet. Lovely. What's so interesting about this bracelet thing is that for some reason it's only happening on Google, whatever this is. Okay, Catherine, can you hear bracelets any longer, or have the bracelets been, eliminated from the video stream? There it is. Now you're going through your mic. Now it is gone. Great, no bracelets. This is so fantastic. So, guys, I'm so excited to be here. I can't believe we're at the end of this summit. It has been one freaking crazy experience, honestly. I had, envisioned this for many months. I remember first starting to talk about this summit about 10 months ago, and about sort of what I wanted to build and what I thought it could be like. And I really had no idea. In a good way, but also in kind of the crazy making way at times. Doing something you've never done before, it can be crazy. And this was an experience. I feel like I've worked harder in the last couple of weeks than I've worked in a long time. We had so many amazing hiccups along the way. One of them, just to give you a preview, was when the email server hid 500 of your emails from me, which was fantastic. So, we'd had the summit going for a few days at that point, and I've been thinking, wow, people really aren't having many customer service issues. Like, this is great. Not many specific questions. I mean, I'm getting a lot of feedback on social media, but no one's really having a lot of problems. And then the email server found 500 email messages all about, specific questions about this page doesn't work on this browser, that kind of stuff. So that was a really fun Sunday night when that happened. There have been a lot of moments like that along the summit. But more than anything, the summit has just been such a great experience. I knew going into this that it would only be really great if I got the best of the best in terms of speakers to come and talk about what they know and what they're good at and what they're passionate about. And I was so pleased that pretty much we got everyone on board that I wanted to. And a lot of these folks are friends. It's not like I was having to reach out with these scary cold emails, but at the same time, they're really busy friends. And so getting them to take the time to do these interviews and to often share stories that they hadn't necessarily shared before, because, as many of you know, a lot of these folks are public speakers, or, they do a lot of podcasting or whatever it may be. And so trying to get them to share stories that they haven't always shared before is a challenge and is really part of the fun of it. So I think it worked out really, really well. And I've just been loving the comments from you guys throughout the course of the summit via email and on social, kind of about who really resonated with you. I think it's been very interesting to me to see how different people really resonate with different viewers. I've said before, but a couple of my favorite summit videos, one of my all-time favorite interviews was with Emily P. Freeman. She's an author. She's written a few awesome books, and she just has a fantastic summit interview that I think just kind of blew it out of the water. Just about this idea of really how to kind of listen to your life. And there were a few key things in that interview that I took away with me. And, I think it's interesting when you interview someone that you've talked to a lot before and you've read a lot of their work before. I read her blog regularly. I've read 3 of her books. I think I've endorsed 1 or 2 of them. I mean, I love her work and I followed it very closely. And so it's interesting when you have conversations with someone like that and yet you still come out of it with incredible new ideas. So one of the ideas that I just want to bring up now, kind of in this closing finale, that I think was one of kind of the best ideas that I heard in the whole summit, was this idea of kind of getting together a board or some people to be co-listeners into your life, essentially. So, the concept behind this, of course, is that many of us have dreams for our lives and things we want to do with our lives, and we don't really know how to get there, right? Which is what life is all about, right? We're humans, we're on a journey, and we don't necessarily know how to put one foot in front of the other to reach some of the biggest goals and dreams we have. And so Emily and her husband, when her husband was going through this period of work transition where he had been, I believe, a youth pastor for 15, 20 years, and he decided he wanted to do something different, but he didn't really know what was next. And they were in a situation where he was able financially in their family to take the time to figure out what was next, which was, a huge blessing. But essentially, he didn't know what was next, and he knew that he probably couldn't figure it out on his own. So he and Emily did this cool thing where they essentially engaged, friends and family in this process of co-listening. And I just loved this idea. And I came away from the interview with her thinking, how can I bring this into my life better? What can I do? Can I set up a personal board of directors, which is another idea that came up in a couple of the interviews, including hers. And this idea of having a board of directors into your life is kind of similar, right? So you would invite in a few sort of mentors and key leaders, people that are close enough to you to potentially agree, and also close enough to you that you would really be transparent with them and let them in. And so essentially the idea would be you would bring them into your life and you would ask them, how can I better be on track to really reach my goals for my life? And, you can set up a schedule. A few of the folks we interviewed talked about how their schedules work, but essentially, meeting twice a year, inviting folks to a nice dinner twice a year and discussing your life, right? It sounds like such a kind of, it sounds kind of a self-indulgent thing, but I think it's an amazing thing in terms of understanding your purpose and understanding what your path really is. And I think if you think about why people go about mentoring and supporting others and guiding others in life, sort of why we all have that internal desire to help another person, you can kind of think about why you might, as a person, agree to be on someone's individual board of directors, right? So I just loved that idea of having a board of directors and creating kind of this idea of having co-listeners in your life. I thought that was really, really fantastic. Let's see, another section of the summit that I wanted to touch on that I just thought was incredibly powerful for me was the session that hopefully you just watched with Don Miller. And Don Miller has been a friend and a mentor of mine for a long time. He's written some amazing books, and I think it's funny when I look back and remember reading some of his books 15 years ago. Obviously not knowing him personally at the time and just being so impacted by them, and then going on sort of the journey of life and becoming friends and learning so much from him. So it's so fun to talk to him when I talk to him in sort of this semi-professional way, like in the interview we just did just an hour ago. So if you haven't watched that one, go back and watch it. And he tells a really powerful story in that interview that really gets to this idea of what success really is. And I don't want to spoil too much of it because I want you to watch the interview, but suffice it to say, he shares a story about watching someone who is really, really crazy successful, someone who has essentially done everything and more, according to the rest of us, when we look at this person and we sort of idolize his life. And yet this person knows where to set those boundaries and limits to kind of protect his family, protect his time, and to protect his work. And I just think it's a really powerful story and a really valuable one to end the summit on. This summit has been all about three things, obviously: purpose and productivity and profit. And the reason for those three things, to me, has always been very, very clear. In very just different stages in my career, whether as a social entrepreneur in Africa, and then as an early employee at Twitter, and then these days as an author and entrepreneur, I've always really, really cared about one thing. And that one thing has really been how to work and how to work well. And so for me, that passion, I see it through the different threads of my career and of my life, just this idea of what it means to do good work, to do meaningful work, and to do it in a way where you are fueling your life and not draining yourself for the rest of your family and friends and the fun you could be having. Because I think that is something that we mistake in this world when we think about work. We think that work should pay the bills, and work should keep you busy, and work should be able to take everything from you. And we don't realize that actually we need to be able to save part of ourselves from our work life. We need to be able to protect ourselves so that we are happy and fulfilled and passionate for our family and for our friends and for all the fun and play we need to have in life. And so I think, early on for me, this sort of passion for understanding work and understanding what worked well and what did not work well in the work world was something that really started to guide me early on. And I think I had an interesting trajectory in terms of my career because I didn't start in a corporate place. I think a lot of times people start in a corporate place and that is what they know. And instead, I started as this social entrepreneur. I was traveling around the world. I was running a nonprofit in Africa. I was really doing things on my own. And so for me, when I then walked into corporate world, which was Silicon Valley, which was, walking into Twitter when there were about 50 folks working there and sort of seeing, okay, what is this company? What are we doing with these, tweets? What are tweets? What can we do to kind of change the world? And at the same time, realizing, oh my goodness, this is what it's like to work in a corporate environment. It was a really, really powerful experience for me in a good way and in a very negative way at the same time. So, one of the things I've talked about before that I want to share a little bit now is, my 5.5 years working at Twitter was a wonderful, wonderful time. And I am so grateful for that time, for the incredible colleagues I had. But, when I think about sort of the things that led me to be really passionate about working well, a lot of the pieces of that really started to come into play when I saw how ineffective a normal corporate work environment can be. And again, I was coming from sort of an entrepreneurial place of working by myself and then working for myself, and then coming into this place where I was working in this wonderful open office with all these amazing colleagues, and also seeing at the same time all these inefficiencies around me. Everything from meetings that took up your whole day to meetings that had no purpose to, email that just, easily took 20 to 30 hours a week to finish, and just the constant lack of focus by sitting next to, your colleagues all day, not having a chance to really breathe and really focus and do your work. One of the stories I tell often about working in that environment is that, very frequently folks would go out to a coffee shop in the middle of the day, say, and they would come back and they would say, it's so amazing. I got done more in the last 3 hours than, I get done in a typical day in the office. And they would be so surprised by that fact. At this point, I'd already started to sort of go down the rabbit hole of understanding what it meant to work and what it meant to work well. And so I understood very clearly that the reason those 3 hours in a coffee shop worked so well and those 8 hours in the office didn't, had everything to do with focus. But seeing that not everyone around me sort of understood that was definitely a light bulb moment, and helping me see that this was something that I was particularly kind of passionate about and particularly perhaps gifted towards, and understanding how to work well. So, for me, this summit in these 3 phases, when you talk about passion and you talk about productivity and you talk about profit, I think the 3 phases are essential, simply because productivity can never be productivity on its own. The reason for that, and you heard some of this in some of the interviews during the summit, is essentially that productivity on its own is lifeless. What's the point, right? Why are we here if we're just here to be more productive? No one wants to be more productive just to be more productive, or hopefully no one does. We want to be more productive so that we can achieve whatever it is we are meant to achieve in this life, whether it's with our family or with our work or with our play, whatever it is. That is the point of being more productive, the point of working less, and the point of being able to get more done in less time. So for me, when I thought, okay, how can I build a summit around this idea of productivity, it was immediately clear that, well, you can't start with productivity. You have to start with purpose, because productivity, real productivity, is about productivity with purpose. So that's why we started the summit with purpose. We had speakers walking you through what it means to really have purpose. And I know that many of you thought it was pretty interesting how some of the speakers had different takes on purpose. There are kind of different camps about purpose. There are those who say, you're born with a purpose. Those who say you have many purposes. And there are those who say, sometimes we get so obsessed with this idea of finding a purpose that we don't just kind of do the good work that we are supposed to be doing, or that is right in front of us. So I think purpose was a fascinating way to kind of start off the summit, because understanding your purpose is, of course, essential to being productive in any way. And then finally, the last phase of the summit, of course, was profit, because once you understand your purpose and once you can get into the nitty-gritty of what it means to be more productive, ultimately the aim of all of this is to be able to increase your profits so that you have more time to do whatever it is you are meant to do in this life. Not more time to, bathe in your gold like Richie Rich or anything like that, but more time so that you can give more and play more and laugh more with family and friends. And so that is really the structure of the summit, and that's why this structure, I think, was so needed. And I think it was received well, at least from what I heard from many of you. I think the idea of having a summit just about productivity that didn't address these key components of purpose and profit would have been a bit lifeless. So that's really what this summit was about. And what I wanted to do is just to bring the 14,000 of you into this and to start understanding some of these topics through the lens of some of these incredible experts. And obviously, the experts had different lenses through which they saw these topics, and different expertise, different levels of expertise in these topics. But the number one question that many of you have asked throughout the summit is, what do we do next? What do we do practically to actually learn to do the things that these speakers talked about? Because, a lot of these speakers did provide some tactical information, but in the course of, an hour-long interview or 45-minute interview, they can only provide so much tactical information. So in this final session right now, what I want to do is I want to introduce you to the big thing that I'm launching tonight, and then walk through a very tactical talk, basically, where I teach you a method that I've developed for essentially doing less to get more done. So first things first, the Work by Design Summit, today was the last day. This is the final session. You're watching it right now. And what we're doing right now, as soon as this session closes, is we are launching Work by Design School. And essentially what this is it's a school to teach you how to work. When I started on this journey many years ago of understanding productivity, I knew that there was an end in sight, and at the time I thought that end in sight had something to do with teaching and teaching about this concept. And as I kind of got closer and closer to the now, I realized how accurate that was. For me, I think one of the guiding reasons why I needed to create Work by Design School is essentially because we never learn how to work. When I started to think about it, we learn how to do all kinds of things. You learn how to, from the age of 2, I have a 2-year-old, right? You learn how to, tie your shoes, how to talk, how to cook a chicken, how to do algebra, how to juggle a soccer ball. You learn all these things. And yet at no point during, primary school or secondary school or university or graduate school do you actually learn how to work. You don't learn about productivity or energy management or how to increase your profits in a sensible way. It's this incredible hole in our education. So Work by Design School is here to fill that hole. It's an online course. It takes place over 10 weeks. There is an incredible amount of content inside. It's 10 modules with many lessons, 40 lessons. There's video content and PDFs and all kinds of bonuses. And I have been spending years doing the research to put this together. So I'm going to put the link so that you can start to kind of peruse it, right? I'll put it into the chat right now so that you can check it out. And then we're going to get into the bulk of this session, which is all going to be a tactical talk about what I call my do less system. And so we're going to talk about what that is. Let me put the link in the system quickly. And then, of course, if you guys are having questions as you go, throughout the course of the session, feel free to, put them in the chat box, and we'll be getting to some of them at the end. I'll be trying to answer as many questions as I possibly can at the end. Okay, so here's the link to Work by Design School. You can check it out. There, boom, it's live. That's very scary to put, it's scary when you put something live after you've spent so much time working on it. And yeah, wow, world is scary. Okay, so let's get into a tactical talk. All right, so when I was at Twitter and learning about productivity and really thinking things could be better, my individual work productivity could be better, the productivity of this company could be better, the productivity of many companies could be better. And when I really started to do the research and go down the rat holes and read the books and talk to the experts, I started to put together this system. Now, at the time, it didn't have a name. It was sort of my ideas on Post-it notes. And then over the years, it developed a name, and then it ended up becoming a book that I came out with about 6 months ago. The book is called Design Your Day, Be More Productive, Set Better Goals, and Live Life on Purpose. And this was my 6th book. And this book was the book where I debuted the principles that I'm going to talk about in this next session right now, and really the principles that form the basis of Work by Design School. So in Design Your Day, the basic overall method that I walk you through is a system called the Do Less system. And this is what I have been, developing over some years of basically research into productivity, into energy management, into what works to make you work well and then get you to play well as well. So we're going to walk through this system. And this is something that you've heard teased at different points in interviews, perhaps, but it's not something that has been talked out at any point in the Work by Design Summit. So new content, wahoo. Okay, let's get going. So the Do Less system, it's first things first, it's an acronym. And I am known for creating acronyms. And the reason for this is because I have a very bad memory. I cannot remember things to save my life. I'm very bad with, meeting people the first time with the name thing. I have very bad facial recognition in movies and television shows, but I guess that's a separate issue not related to this. So I have various issues in life though. But suffice it to say, memory is one of them. So I need acronyms to remind me about things. So for me, developing an acronym, and the acronym is Do Less, was really essential to making sure that I understood the 6 key principles to follow in order to really maintain this idea of working less in order to achieve and earn more. So we're going to walk through these 6 principles right now. And again, as you have questions, put them in the chat box, and then we will come to all the questions afterwards. We already have a big list of questions from folks on Periscope and here that we're going to be working through. So let's start. So the Do Less system, the acronym is Do Less. And really the entire concept here is that most of us, if we do learn anything about working at any point in our young or adult lives, we basically just learn that you should work harder, that you should hustle, that you should push, that you should not complain. And we don't really learn that actually that is probably some of the dumbest advice you could ever get when it comes to work. Because in reality, unless you learn certain principles of work, you are probably working really poorly. You're probably not using much of your focus. You're probably not using much of your concentration. You're probably working at the absolute wrong time of day. You're probably multitasking. You're probably doing a host of things that you shouldn't be doing that are making it very, very hard for you to work well, that are basically not setting you up for success. So as a result, just pushing harder or hustling more or working harder or working longer hours is not going to get you what you want. It's just going to get you burnout and frustration. You're just going to feel more tired. You're not actually going to get anything done. So the concept of the do less system is exactly the opposite. It's the idea that if we identify how to work well and we learn how to work well in our lives, then we can actually do less, and we actually see that doing less is the key to getting better work done. So we're gonna walk through this acronym. So DOLESS, do less. And the first D is all about deciding. So you've maybe heard before that, you know, you can't get where you want to go unless you have some sense of where that is. And I love, there's a similar quote in Alice in Wonderland that I can't even remember right now, but it's something like Alice says to the cat, something like, oh, this is a great story. Here I am. I have no idea what. Alice says something to the cat, something like, you know, where do I want to be? And he says, doesn't matter if you don't know where you want to go. Okay, let's pretend the last 10 seconds just didn't happen. In any case, there's a great line in Alice in Wonderland that you should Google. So, have a drink of water. Got kind of off track. Okay, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been, and you won't get where you're going unless you have an idea of where you want to be. So the first step in this acronym, do less, the first idea is this D, this idea of deciding. Deciding is essential. Making decisions and creating intention around those decisions is the first and most important thing you need to do in order to do less work, be more productive, earn more, and play and live a better life. So what I recommend folks do as a first clear step in deciding, because there are many steps in deciding that we'll talk about in Work by Design School, but suffice it to say, the most important first thing you can do is to try to create a word of the year. And if you've never heard of this concept, let me just give you kind of a brief idea of what it is, because I think it's a really interesting newish idea that kind of brings together a lot of kind of concepts of goal setting and intention setting into a simple idea that many people can understand. So essentially, some years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I read in a book this idea of coming up with a word for your year. And the concept is you come up with one word, and that word is kind of your guiding light, your North Star for the year to come. And it doesn't have to be necessarily for a year. You could have it for many years, or you could have it for just 3 months, a season. You know, it is just one word that guides you. So it's before you start thinking about goal setting, before you start thinking about priorities, anything, you just want a word to tell you where to go. And the first year I did this, I was in a season of a lot of overwhelm. I was just starting to apply a lot of these productivity principles into my life. And at the same time, I was having some health challenges. And I very clearly knew when I read this idea in a book that my word was gonna be rest. And so for that year, my word of the year was rest. And it was an incredible guiding light to help me make decisions, because that is really the key with a word of the year. It helps you make those decisions. So coming up with a word of the year is a great, great first step when you're trying to decide what's important. Now, the second key thing you can do when you're talking about deciding what's important for your life is you're going to do goal setting. Now, in Work by Design School, we do a kind of intense module all about goal setting, but let me give you kind of an overview into what smart goal setting is and what not smart goal setting is. We could say stupid goal setting, I guess, but I feel like people try to avoid saying the word stupid, so they say not smart. So there's this guy named Paul Meyer, and he came up with this concept of SMART goals some decades ago. And essentially a SMART goal is a goal that is specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. And so the purpose of his acronym in this case is to clarify that, you know, it is not a smart goal to say, I'm going to make $1 billion next year, unless you made 90% of that in the past year, right? Coming up with goals should be things that, yes, you can dream for to some extent, but that you also have a reasonable ability of hitting, and that you certainly have ways to measure yourself against and ways to plan for. So the concept of coming up with smart goals is one that really everyone should really be bringing into their life. But the first step in doing that is coming up with a word for your year. So come up with a word for your year. There are lots of different types of words that folks go for. You know, over the last 5 years, I've had a couple interesting ones. I've done rest, I think, twice. I've had the word renew. I've had a hashtag ban busy. I had another hashtag this year. It was work by design was my hashtag this year, because I knew that my own intention about my work life had to be very much by design this year, as I got ready to launch these products and launch this, online summit. So words can be different things. They can be nouns, they can be verbs. I had a blog reader who actually had a proper noun as one. It was the name of his child, because he knew that in the year to come, he really had to focus on his child. And so that was his word of the year. It can be whatever you want it to be, but it needs to be something that is meaningful to you and that really is kind of the guiding light. So then after you can come up with your word of the year, then you can start thinking about your goals, and you'll see that your goals, for the most part, do point towards this North Star of your word of the year. So that's just kind of an overview of what the first step in this do less method is. D is deciding what's important. That's part one. And two great ways to go about starting to decide what's important are to set a word for your year and to go through the process of goal setting. So, Work by Design School has very specific modules that walk you through this. If not, you could probably find some information online that shares some of these ideas as well, sort of in disparate places, if you're just kind of interested in some one-off articles. So part two of the do less method. So we've done D for decide. Now we're doing O, and O is about organizing. So O is about organizing your life around those decisions you made. Because of course, one of the biggest mistakes that most of us make in our daily lives when we think about productivity and lack of productivity is we wake up, we have no plan, we reach for our iPhone, we start scrolling through emails, and we start immediately responding to other people's fires, other people's priorities, other people's ideas of what are important, right? And so the number one way to stop that is to make decisions about what is important in our life, and then to organize our life around those decisions. So part two of the do less method is all about organizing your life around those decisions you made in part one. And so in order to organize, we go through 4 steps, LESS. So we've done D, we've done O, and now we're doing LESS. So the first L is about limiting the work you do to your best 20%. And this is my hands down favorite module in Work by Design School, because this activity has completely changed my life. And there is a very specific kind of lengthy-ish activity I walk you through in Work by Design School. So I want to give kind of an overview of it, what it looks like now. We won't have time to get into the nitty-gritty of it. But essentially, the concept of this, the concept of limiting what you do to your best 20% is the following. You've maybe heard of the 80-20 rule, or Pareto's principle. Basically, it says that 80% of the effort that you put into something pretty much results you about 20% of the results, right? Not so good. So you're putting in 80% of work and you're only getting 20% of the results out. In contrast, 20% of the work you do gives you 80% of your results, which is wonderful if you think about it, right? So if you think about some big project you recently completed, let's say you recently published a book. If you were to quantify and write down all the work you did over the course of that process of writing and publishing a book, you would realize that 20% of the work you did actually was what got you 80% of the way there to successfully publishing a book. And this is an amazing idea that I just wish everyone understood, because it changes the way you think about everything. And certainly it changes the way you think about everything in your work life. You realize how much of the time you're on that hamster wheel to do the 80% of stuff that's only going to net you that 20% result, right? And many of us have different things in our life that constitute that sort of massive 80% that we do. I mean, email, I think a lot of us would agree that probably a lot of email falls into that 80% of stuff that is not actually our best work, but that we get sucked into and it doesn't ultimately lead to great results. So the goal of this activity then is to isolate what are your best 20% activities. And this is, it's not a simple activity exactly. Well, let me take it back. It's simple, but it's time consuming, right? It's going to require you to spend about an hour of time at least just thinking with, a piece of paper and like a red pen. And a lot of people don't want to do that stuff. But I think that's kind of the deal, right? With working and with learning, you kind of got to put in the work to make changes. And so if you're the type of person that wants to see a big result in terms of your productivity and your earnings, this is the type of activity you're going to love in Work by Design School. So essentially, I'm going to walk you through the activity. I will walk you through the activity in Work by Design School, but what it looks like is basically figuring out of all the things you do on a daily basis and on an annual basis, what are the things that are actually moving the needle? And then working slowly to reduce your work to only those things. Now, you're not going to be perfect. It's not like you're going to be able to eliminate all the annoying stuff you do in your life. And I think there's a great interview in the Work by Design Summit that you might have seen, where I think I asked John Acuff about this idea that I read in a book once that, people say, so I read in a book once, if you didn't see this interview, I read this book and I was really loving the book. And then I got to this part where the author, who's a very successful guy, very well known for being successful, made some comment about how it has been years since he did something he didn't want to do. And I was like, what? He hasn't done something, he hasn't done anything he doesn't want to do in years. I thought that was pretty kind of crazy. And so I underlined it. And then I started asking people I knew what they thought of this. And John Acuff just laughed and laughed when he heard this. And I think it's very true. We all, no matter how successful we are going to do things we don't want to do. You probably don't like taking out the trash or, dealing with like rat droppings in your backyard garage or, there are things we all do in our work lives and certainly in our personal lives as well that are not things that we really want to do. And that certainly aren't things that you would consider your best 20% activities, right? But the point of the 80-20 rule as it applies to this idea of limiting your work to your best 20% is to try to get really close to that magic number because it will change your work life completely. When you start doing all those things that you shouldn't be doing, but you're doing, and as I'm saying that right now, some of you are thinking of a few things in your head, then you'll feel great. But what you'll feel even better is when you stop doing those things that you don't know yet that you shouldn't be doing. Because that's what's so interesting about the exercise is that it forces you to think about things that you assume that you have to do when really you don't. And that's why I love doing this exercise with people because you watch their wheels in their brain turning as they say, well, of course I have to do that. But then they realize, oh, maybe I don't. And obviously, a very common one that I talk to lots of entrepreneurs and, corporate employees about is this idea of managing their own email. A lot of times that's kind of the last thing that people can't let go of. And they say, well, of course I have to manage my own email because, important people email me and because I'm the one that best understands my brain. And, they say all these things. But when you really start digging down, as an example, email is an amazing way to release many, many, many hours of your life up by simply changing the way you approach it. And by, if you have the resources, either in a corporate budget or you're an entrepreneur and you have resources to hire someone to help you with that. So L, limiting your work to your best 20% is my favorite module, and it's an awesome module, and it will change the way that you work. So we've done D, decide, O, organize, L, limit your work to your best 20%. And now we're going to talk about E in do less. And the E is about editing down the time you spend. And so this calls to mind another important principle. It's called Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law basically says that work expands or contracts to fill the time you give it. And so my favorite example of this is packing, right? So if I am packing for a trip and I know that the taxi is coming to pick me up in 45 minutes, I will pack my bag in 45 minutes. I will be ready and I probably won't forget anything and I'll be fine. Or if I do forget anything, it won't be that important and I'll be fine. 45 minutes. However, if I am traveling in 4 days and I start packing now and I don't really put a time clock against it, I just sort of willy-nilly do it, I can easily spend 4 hours over the next 4 days packing that same suitcase. I will, take clothes out of the closet and look at them and then just sort of put them back. And then I'll get out my like Ziploc bags and put little things in them and take them out. And, you can just fill the time that you have. And this is something I always think about when I pack because it always happens. Whatever time I have, that is the time it will take. And so this idea can be applied to work. And what I recommend you do in Work by Design School, or just listening to me right now, is to think about how this applies to your work life. Because then as soon as you understand how it applies to your work life, then you can work on reducing the time you spend on work. So editing down the time you spend. And editing down the time you spend is not necessarily organic. So let me explain what I mean by that. I don't mean that just by understanding that you can do things in less time, you will automatically do them in less time. That's not what I mean. What I mean is about often creating false constraints or limits so that you actually have to do those things in less time. So we were talking about email in a previous example. A perfect way to start with trying to edit down time you spend on certain work-related tasks would be to be reducing the time you spend on email. So one of the best tools I recommend in Work by Design School is a program called Rescue Time. It's a program that runs in the back of your computer. It costs about $60 a year for the pro version, and it tracks everything you do on your computer, right? So I can log in right now to Rescue Time, and it'll tell me, I spent 45 minutes on Kayak today, looking at flights to Boston. You spent 3 hours and 25 minutes in Google and Gmail. 45 minutes of that was on this one email to your friend Amalia. I mean, it will tell you, it will break things down and it will tell you exactly what you're doing, right? And it runs in the background and it gives you reports once a week and it's awesome. So one great first step in trying to edit down the work you do and the time you spend on your work is to create a false constraint. So say, hey, if you spent 18 hours on email last week, which is probably pretty accurate. On average, most of us spend about 40% of our work lives in email naturally, right? So if you're taking Work by Design School, if you're signing up tonight for Work by Design School, we're going to reduce that dramatically. But let's say you're spending about 18 hours a week on email. So one way to try to start editing down the time you spend would be to say, hey, I'm only going to give myself 16 hours this week. That's it, 16 hours, and then I'm done. And you will see that you will make it happen, or 99 times out of 100, you will make it happen. And you will do certain things to make it happen that are all key to being more productive. You might find a quieter space to do your email in. You might realize that, hey, there's actually a lot of sense in only checking email 3 times a day, or 2 times a day, or once a day. Hey, you might realize it actually makes a lot of sense to even take email off my phone. So that's just an example of how you can start trying to edit down the time you spend on something that is really a big, hairy beast in most of our lives, which is email. And if you're a fan of kind of email hacking, we've got lots of content for you in Work by Design School about it, because this is like a massive confession. So I love email. And because I love email, it was always kind of my blind spot in terms of productivity. I didn't understand that I really wasn't maximizing it, because I always justified what I was doing because I liked it. And that's really not much of a justification, because no matter how much you like email, email is not the same as play or hanging out with your husband or hanging out with your 2-year-old. It's in any way at all, right? So for me, email was a really, really powerful kind of barrier I had to get through. And I share more about that in Work by Design School, but email is something that I think everyone needs to seriously evaluate in your own life. And, for some folks, you may need sort of more psychotherapy on it than others. I was like deep in the weeds in terms of my email mentality. So, if I can get out of it, so can you. Okay, so we've talked about deciding and organizing, limiting down your work to your best 20%. Now editing down the time you spend on that work. And now we've got 2 steps left in the do less system. The next one is S, streamline. And this step is basically a step full of tactics. So there are tons of tactics I talk about in Work by Design School. You also see some of them in this book, in Design Your Day. Basically tactics that help you understand what we've been discussing up until this point in the system. So all these ideas about what works and what doesn't, and then showing how they work tactically and what you can do tactically. So let me give you a couple examples. So one example, one of my favorite examples is this idea of batching your work. If you haven't heard of this before, basically what it means is that you should be doing similar work at similar times of the day in order to be productive. So, it is insanely unproductive to do the following: to arrive at the office, sit down with your water, your 2 coffees or whatever it is, double fisting, start responding to emails, have a coworker come up, ask you some question, then have the phone ring, pick it up, start doing a sales call, then put the phone down, then talk to the coworker, then go back to email, and just do that all day, right? Switching between things all day. That is the most unproductive thing you can do. And it's what many of us are doing in our work lives on a daily basis, whether we work for ourselves or we work in an office in a corporate setting. So stopping that is essential. So the way you can go about stopping that is to learn how to batch your work. So batching your work would say, in the context of those 3 things I just talked about, you would find times of the day to do each of those things and to only do those things. So you set aside time in the day to talk to coworkers. Maybe it's chatting time, or maybe it's, your face-to-face meeting time. You'd set aside separate times in the day to just do your email. Then you'd set aside separate times in the day to do your sales calls, right? And now you can do this on these sort of low level and on the extreme level. I'm like things on the extreme level, woohoo! So the way I do it now is I really batch my week. So I will have specific days assigned to certain things. So one day, so for example, in recording some of the interviews for the Work by Design Summit, those interviews that weren't live, I would batch those into one day, right? Because it would be easier for me to do 6 interviews in one day than to have one interview I had to prepare for each day for 6 days, right? Because you're using a part of your brain in a similar way to do a bunch of interviews, so it makes sense to do them all at once. So batching tasks is absolutely essential. And doing it in as focused of a way as possible is absolutely, absolutely key. So, there are a few different ways to think about how you can be as focused as possible. One of them is to think about your space. So making sure that the space you are in is a focused space, whether that is in an office with a closed door, or whether it's in a coffee shop with ambient noise but no one talking to you, or whether it's, in the depths of the stacks of some library no one's ever heard of in the middle of Alabama. Whatever it is to you, finding focus is really essential to making batching work, because batching is all about taking advantage of not switching between tasks. Because, when we switch between tasks, we can lose up to 25 minutes of time, which is, completely crazy. So you can understand how an entire work week is essentially taken up by email, 40%, meetings. Oh yeah, PS, most people's meetings take up 40% of their work life. And then the last 20% is just switching between tasks. Okay, so another great tip in the streamlining section is this idea of productive multitasking. So I love the concept of productive multitasking. Essentially, multitasking is dead. Multitasking doesn't work. Your brain does not work to multitask, to switch between tasks like we just talked about. Multitasking isn't actually multitasking. What it is switching between tasks. And as we just discussed, when you switch between tasks, it can take your brain up to 25 minutes to actually get into the new task. So multitasking, RIP multitasking, if you have not seen the online BuzzFeed articles about it, it's over, right? So what is productive multitasking then, Claire, and how can that possibly exist if RIP multitasking? Productive multitasking is combining a physical activity with a mental activity. So I read a lot. I usually set a goal to read 200 books a year, which is insane. One of the ways I am able to get that goal, to achieve that goal, is I do productive multitasking. So when I'm exercising 6 hours a week, I'm actually listening to audiobooks at the same time. So productive multitasking is basically combining a mindless physical activity with a mental activity, like in this case, listening to an audiobook. So we go into this way more in depth in Work by Design School, but I love productive multitasking. I think it can be used extremely well. And one of the things you can really do to see a huge impact in terms of your calendar and in terms of getting things done is to actually schedule in time for productive multitasking into your work week. So those are just a couple tips. Again, this section of streamlining in the do less system, there's so many things I could talk about. We don't have enough time because we've got a ton of questions coming in also, but there's a lot of meat in there. So the final step in the do less system, so we've done decide, organize, limit, edit, streamline, it's stopping. And sometimes folks don't understand how stopping can be part of any system that has anything to do with productivity. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the keynote, just this idea that, people think that being productive is just about pushing and pushing and pushing when it's really not. It's about managing your energy well, and stopping is essential to making sure that you manage your energy well. So there are a few types of ways to stop. And I just want to mention them here because I think they're all really essential to different degrees. One of the key ways to stop is to make sure that you create limits into your daily life that allow you to stop. So making sure that you're not checking email or checking your iPhone at all hours of the day and night, right? Another clear way to stop is to create a weekly stop. So in Work by Design School, I talk about the concept of a digital detox weekly, or some people call it a digital Sabbath. It's basically when you take one day completely off your devices and kind of what that can do to help your brain calm down and get ready for the week to come. And then finally, the most intense type of stopping is when you take a longer digital detox. And this typically is great to coincide with some sort of vacation. Maybe you can do it a couple times a year on a vacation, whether it's a 3-day vacation or a 10-day vacation, but it's essentially getting away from your devices and just letting your brain kind of be in the peace and calm and not be the crazy internet brain, because all of our brains have basically become crazy internet brains. And so it's really important for our productivity and for our energy for us to detox from that. So, the final step in the system is all about stopping. There's lots of strategies and meat in there. But essentially, the do less system at the end of the day is just a way to do better work in less time. And the goal of that is so that you have more time to live your life. And I think it's really important to say here that this does not mean that you have to hate your job for this to matter, because that is not true at all. I don't hate my job at all. I love what I do these days. And yet I also know that doing work well in shorter amounts of time with more focused attention and more concentration not only leads to better work, but it leads to better relaxation and rejuvenation so that I can then come back to that better work. So I think one of the biggest myths about why people shouldn't be productive is people saying, but I love working, I'm a workaholic. But that's a different thing entirely. Being a workaholic and being burned out is not a goal that is fun for anyone's family or anyone's personal mental health. So trying to figure out how to really do less in a healthy way is really essential. So that's the do less system. You can, learn more about it in this book if you want some sort of overview stuff. The Work by Design School, which is now open as of 10 minutes ago, whatever it is, has this in spades. We go into it so in depth, you'll be amazed. But yeah, this is what I believe is really key to making you work the way you're really meant to work, because I think most of us these days are working in a way that we think is normal, but really shouldn't be. And I think society, in many aspects has led us to think it is normal and led us to think it is okay, when really there is a much, much, much better way. And, in my own life, I have seen that better way so clearly. I went on such a journey to become kind of a student of productivity and a student of work. And it took years. And about 5 years after I started the journey, I was looking back and saying, this is crazy. I have halved my work hours, reduced my work hours in half. I've, quadrupled my income. I've done all these things by using these principles. And I know that these principles don't just work for me, they can work for anyone. And so Work by Design School is really that. It's about teaching you to cut your work hours in half, to increase your profits, your income, and to really live more of your life. Because again, we don't learn how to work. We never learned how to work. And yet that's kind of probably the one thing we should have learned, right? There are a lot of things, not that. So yeah, so that's that. Let's go in and kind of let's see some of the questions that have come in, and I've got a list of them already, but definitely feel free to send more along, and we'll basically go through some of these questions and see how long my black tea holds me. Okay. Let me see. Oh, I love it. Someone is talking about the Alice in Cheshire Cat quote that I could not remember. That's very, very helpful. Yeah, it's something like Alice in the Cheshire Cat. Which path should I take? Where do you want to go? I don't know. Then it doesn't matter. That's perfect. That's a good sort of description of what it is. So, okay, here are a couple questions I'm going to dive into. So, someone is asking, oh, okay, this is an interesting question. Do you think all the speakers in the Work by Design Summit are truly productive people? That's an interesting question. Okay, so here's what I would have to say about that. I did not ask only speakers who were productive people, and that very clearly goes into the reason that the summit was, done in 3 phases, right? This idea of purpose and productivity and profit, right? So the speakers I asked were experts in their own right, and not necessarily just experts of productivity, but experts in this idea of either purpose or productivity or profit. So I think that there are very clearly speakers in the productivity space, for example, folks like Chris Bailey or Laura Vanderkam, who you would say, yes, those are productivity experts 100% all the way. But then there are folks where you'd say, like Don Miller, who just finished his keynote tonight, who just finished his final interview tonight, and you would say, well, he's not a productivity expert, but he's an expert on, figuring out what you're meant to do and figuring out how your company should be, messaging itself to get people to understand what they're meant to do in the world. So I think that each speaker was an expert in one of the 3 phases they were assigned for. And that means that they're all awesome. It doesn't mean that they're all necessarily super productive. Okay, let's look at another question. Oh, another question about my favorite session. I mean, I feel like I kind of answered that at the beginning of this when I talked about how much I loved Emily Freeman's session. I just thought it was so well done. And I just loved listening to her. But people are probably bored by that answer by now. So I think another favorite session of mine was Chris Bailey. Chris Bailey is the guy who basically spent, I think he's still like only 25 or 26, and he spent a year doing all these crazy productivity experiments, and they were so enlightening. And when he sent me an advanced reader copy of his book about 6 months ago, I couldn't put it down. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I have to talk to this guy. And so some of his experiments were so ridiculous, and they sounded like they would be great ideas or terrible ideas, and then the exact opposite thing happened. So for example, one of his experiments, he spends 80 hours a week meditating, I think it was. Maybe it was 40 hours a week meditating. Whatever it was a crazy amount of time meditating, and I'm a meditator, basically to understand what that would mean. Because not only what it would mean to actually be meditating for that period of time, but what it would mean to have that much of his time taken up by meditation so that he only had this other little bit of time to work on the edges of it. And what he learned was pretty fascinating. But the most clear experiment that he did, which was just, an abject fail and which taught him immensely, was when he worked 90-hour weeks. It did not work at all. And there are many studies out there that show that essentially you can get some very short-term rewards from overwork, but it basically drops off immediately. I mean, you get short-term rewards for like a day, and then you're already completely being unproductive again. You're doing work, you think you're doing work, but it's just not productive. It's not moving any needle. It's just you refreshing your email essentially again and again. Okay, another question. Oh, someone's asking, what was the most ineffective thing that you saw when you were working at Twitter? So, Twitter was a fantastic company, very much as one of the Silicon Valley companies where it's kind of known for being innovative in the space of work. So I think it was always surprising when you would see things that didn't seem innovative. And I don't know if I can think of one most ineffective thing right now. I will say that one of the challenges, I would say, is there are some companies like this now that kind of are encouraging with their cafeteria models. So, Twitter was one of those companies where there's food, like the meals are served all the time, right? So there's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so it really encourages people to be in the office at all hours of the day and night. And, this is becoming sort of increasingly more of a trend. It's certainly a big trend in Silicon Valley, and it's, expanded beyond that. And, the obvious downside to that is, of course, that people never leave the office because they end up working more, right? So, they have great food 3 times a day, so they stay in the office for 15 hours instead of 10 hours or whatever it is. And they end up kind of working more, which is, I'm sure, the point of why these companies do this in the first place, right? But I think there's this hidden cost that people don't actually complain about, but they should, which is that I actually do think it's challenging for some people, especially introverts. I'm an introvert, to have all your meals be with your coworkers also, because then you're really not getting downtime in any way. And especially when you're already in an open office environment, so you're already dealing with those challenging aspects of kind of focus and talking with people frequently. Not having that time and space during your meals, I think, was a real extra challenge. So I would say that was difficult for me. And I'm sure that led to inefficiencies for a lot of employees, myself included, because it meant that I was, you're basically at lunch and breakfast and dinner also talking about work. So you're never getting any moment to recharge. And, so it would lead to probably loss of work, certainly, loss of productivity, and also feelings of burnout, feeling like I need to just get out of the office for 10 minutes, take a walk, things like that. So I would say that was something I would point to as being a problem. Another person's asking, are big companies or smaller companies more productive or more effective? I don't think you can kind of say one is more effective or less effective than the other. I think you can find sort of massive pros and cons to both. I think it's absolutely about company culture. I will say that, with a bigger company, the big benefit you get is there are a lot of rules and structure put around how you can work. Things like your vacation policy and things like your work hours and things like your remote working policy, right? There's a lot of structure around that, which allows you to have very clear expectations. But at the same time, there's less flexibility, right? So in contrast, in a small startup, you have a lot more flexibility, but that often means that you don't really know where you stand, what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, and when you can take a vacation and when you can't, when you leave the office and when you can't. And so what that means in terms of productivity is pretty dramatic. Someone's asking, what is monotasking? I must have mentioned that. So monotasking is essentially just when you do one task at once. So multitasking is this idea that you're doing multiple things at once, when in reality, what studies show is that multitasking is not doing multiple things. It's just switching between multiple things really quickly, right? And the cost of switching can actually be up to 25 minutes. So the cost of your focus. So multitasking does not work at all. Monotasking is when you do one thing. And the one thing I will say about monotasking is, monotasking has a good reputation, but you need to be careful to make sure you're actually monotasking, because a lot of times people think they might be monotasking when they're just doing one thing, when really there are a couple different things happening. So for example, a pretty common one is lots of people still check email when they're like watching the TV news, or the TV news is on in the background, or maybe some other type of, TV or radio or podcast or something is on in the background. And that's actually not really monotasking, because that is taking up some of your brain's attention. So you just want to make sure that if you're monotasking, you're really monotasking, and you want to be monotasking. That's the way to go. Let me see. Someone's asking about the difference in productivity for being an entrepreneur to being an employee, and what is, I guess, more productive is, I'm presuming, what they're asking. I think one thing, and you can't say that one is more productive than the other. I think there are lots of pros and cons to both. The major difference between an entrepreneur and an employee when it comes to productivity has to do with ownership of time. So there are some employees that have a really high level of ownership over their time, so that are able to dictate very much their work hours, their travel schedule, where they should be, where they're working, whether if they're in a coffee shop or at home, in the office. And then there are some employees who do not have much flexibility over that. So the more flexibility you have, or the more ownership you have over your time as an employee, the more chances you'll have to basically craft a personal productivity plan for you. But that does not mean that having full ownership of your time, like being an entrepreneur, makes you more productive. Because there are many people that say that actually entrepreneurs have it worse when it comes to productivity, because they don't have set limits around them. So one of the sessions in the Work by Design Summit was with Jessica Turner, who has a full-time day job in health marketing, but then also runs this like very successful blog on the side, and she's written this best-selling book called The Fringe Hours. And basically in the book, she talks about this idea that, you know, her husband said to her many years ago when he would see her getting up at 5 in the morning to do her work on her blog before going to work, he would say, you know, you do more between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. than most people do between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And the underlying message of this, of course, was that the reason that she was able to do so much in the morning is because she had that constraint. She knew she would be booked from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., but she knew this blog was really important to her, and this the writing project she was working on, really important. So she figured out a way to make it happen. So, you know, certainly if you're watching this and you're not sure if something like Work by Design School is for you because you're an employee, think again, because, you know, many people say that entrepreneurs actually can have it worse when it comes to productivity because they don't have set constraints in their life. So that's a really interesting, an interesting sort of problem to untangle and figure out. So let me see. Someone's asking, how do I handle my email? That's a big can of worms, but how do I handle my email? So these days, the way I handle my email and the way I recommend that people handle their email is checking a couple times a day at preset times, not having email on your phone, and making sure that you have probably one period of time in the week when you batch process non-urgent emails. So I'll check emails a couple times a day. I'll deal with the urgent or the daily emails that I have to deal with then. But then other emails where maybe people are asking me for things that I know are not urgent in any way and that can easily wait 5 days, I will do once a week. And then keeping email off your phone is another sort of key thing. And email, as I said, you know, email is something we've gone to really deeply into Work by Design School because it's such a hairy beast. Yeah, so those are the questions that I have here. Let me go back over to the, let me just check everywhere and make sure no one else has sent in anything else. Yeah, but I think we've had fun. How long has it been? Almost an hour and a half now. I don't even know. This is fun, guys. You know, Work by Design Summit, I've said it a couple times, but it was really the combination of so much work, and it went better than I really could have expected. And the reason for that is, of course, you guys, that you guys all showed up. We got 14,000 of you to come watch all these interviews and watch these amazing speakers. And I'm just so incredibly grateful. So thank you for being here. You know, you can still get access to Work by Design. The All Access Pass is still available. The price is going to go up in a couple of days. So if you want to get in, you'll need to get in. I think tomorrow night is the last time at the latest at the current pricing. And otherwise then it goes up like another $100. And then it'll be at kind of its long-term price where it'll be sort of for, you know, eternity. And then of course, if you are interested in really trying to take your personal productivity to the next level in terms of trying to really reduce your work hours and increase your income, you know, I believe that Work by Design School might be the place for you. I tell people who get into Work by Design School that, hey, we can cut your work hours in half. And I really think we can do that with you. So check it out, workbydesignschool.net. I can't wait to see you there. Shoot me any emails if you've got any questions. And yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. This has been an awesome experience. And woohoo! Yeah, cheers. Cheers to me with my water with lemon. How exciting. I feel like there's that scary moment where I'm gonna like click stop broadcast. It's gotta happen though. You gotta do it, right? All good things come to an end. All right, thank you guys so much. This has been so much fun. Thank you and have a great night.